So I've been a therapist for over 50 years, and I've always tried to look for ways to make therapy more efficient and impactful. Originally, I was a non-directive Freudian. I wouldn't share my feelings, just tell me about your mother sort of thing. But I was heavily influenced by Carl Rogers, Fritz Perls, Virginia Satir, and Carl Rogers did some interesting research about the top therapists in a variety of fields, and he found in a variety of schools of psychotherapy, and he found that the best therapists, regardless of how different their technique was, they had certain things in common, and they were unconditional positive regard and non-possessive warmth. And that encouraged me to be more existential and more open about my feelings. Then in 1977 and 78, I started listening to a guy named Sydney Banks, spiritual teacher. You can Google him. He's a wonderful man, great teacher. And it really had an impact on me. In fact, there were three things that had a big impact on me that year, 77, 78. One was a book review I read on Tibetan Buddhism called Unlocking the Secrets of Tibet. And there was a sentence in that book review that when I read it, it just physically impacted my body. So the sentence was, and I'd encourage everybody to just kind of let this bathe over them: you're not your mind, you're not your body, you're not your emotions, you're not your ego, you're something grand and mysterious beyond all that. And the third thing that hit me strongly that year was there's a psychiatrist named Jerry Jampolsky, and he was alcoholic, his practice was falling apart, his life was falling apart, and he started studying the Course in Miracles, and it completely transformed his life. Well, I studied the Course in Miracles, and it was a little cumbersome for me, and it seemed like it had a lot of religiosity and chauvinistic references. But Jampolsky did something really brilliant. The Course in Miracles is a 365-day course. You have a different study every day for a whole year. He condensed, it was kind of the Americanization of the Course in Miracles. He condensed it down to 18 days and eliminated all the chauvinistic references and the kind of religiosity and the cumbersome words. So I sent away and I started doing this course. And these three vastly different things: here's this spiritual teacher up in Canada, here's Tibetan Buddhism, here's this Course in Miracles wisdom, but they're all telling me the same thing. And they all really touched me deeply. Sometimes I'd sit in Sid's seminars and cry. Just felt like I was coming home. So I'll give you the 6 principles behind Jampolsky's 18-day mini-course. One of the main purposes of time is to allow us to choose what we want to experience. Do we want to experience peace, or do we want to experience conflict? And most people don't realize it, but hundreds and hundreds of times a day you choose between love and fear, love and fear. I'll explain later why you don't know what you're doing. The second principle is all minds are joined and are one. And what that means is we're all connected in some way that's beyond logic and understanding. The third principle is what we perceive with our physical senses presents us with a limited and distorted view of reality. And that's a really interesting one. I mean, there's a lot of powerful information in this. You see, when you were born and you're 2 days old and 4 months old and 2 years old and 5 years old and 10 years old, you make decisions and conclusions about life. And very often they're negative, limiting conclusions. Nobody has perfect parents, and to keep from going crazy, you make these limiting conclusions about food, sex, money, males, females, telling the truth, asking for what you want. And they serve you when you're little because you adjust to the environment of your parents. And you're trying to make sense out of it, and you're trying to protect yourself from just having your heart broken day after day. By the time you're 18 and move out of the house, these conclusions and decisions are so deeply embedded in your body that it's referred to as your character armor. It's called your character armor, and it's actually in your body. This is important because I'll tell you something that happened to me that, see, for a year, I tried to practice this wisdom. And I could talk the talk, but I couldn't walk the walk. But I was doing the mini course, and I'll finish the other 3 principles. But remember this: what you perceive with your physical senses presents you with a limited and distorted view of reality. Now, don't beat yourself up about that. It's just the way people function. Number 4, we really cannot change the world we live in or other people. We can change how we perceive the world, how we perceive others, and how we perceive ourselves. 5, basically there are only 2 emotions. One is love, the other is fear. Something, love is our true reality. Fear is something our mind has made up and is therefore unreal. 6 is what we experience in life is our inner reality projected outward, our inner experience projected outward. So if your mind is full of love and forgiveness and connectedness, that's what you project and experience. If your mind is filled with doubt, fear, and concern about illness, that's what you will project, and it becomes your experiential reality. We're all going through life making up our own movie, and the universe will always give you enough ammunition for any movie you want to make up. So everybody has a little mind and a big mind. Your little mind runs on fear, insecurity, scarcity consciousness. There's not enough time, not enough money, not enough sunshine, whatever it is. Fortunately, everyone has a big mind. In your big mind, you already know everything I'm telling you. You're just listening to this to be reminded of this deep wisdom that's inside of all of us. And essentially, you can boil all your struggles down to one simple statement. Your little mind would rather be right than happy. That's what everybody struggles with. You see, these conclusions you make when you're a kid, and by the time you're 18 and out of the house, they're deeply embedded in you. Your little mind is very attached to those conclusions. And regarding those conclusions, your little mind would rather be right than happy. And those conclusions are so strong and deeply embedded in you, they actually distort your physical perceptions. And that's where all of our struggle comes from. So, in 1977, I was studying all this wisdom, and I was trying to share it with my clients, and somehow it wasn't working. I hadn't surrendered to it. And 4 of us therapists were really close. 2 of us, John Enright and I, were the older, more experienced therapists, and George and Roger were the younger, less experienced ones. But they're the ones that moved to Salt Spring Island and hung out with Sid all the time. And after a while, John and I would go up there once in a while and attend seminars for a day or 2. So after a while, George and Roger wanted to do a seminar like Sid does down in San Francisco, and they invited John and I to be guests. So I went to this seminar, and it was like Sid's seminars. You know, you talk about this wisdom and how it's affected your life, and you share a little bit, then you go walk in the sunshine for a while, and then you come back and share some more. And it's a very easygoing, low-key thing. Well, at the end of this weekend, George and Roger took John and I aside, and George said, and I can still see this, I can still see George sitting on this log, and he said, we just wanted to tell you guys, everything you shared this weekend came from your ego. And as soon as he said that, I went into one of these old tapes from my childhood, immediately. And it was, oh bleep, why is it every time someone gets close to me, they need to find things wrong with me? And I don't know how I did this, but I was desperate. I'd been studying this stuff for a year, and I knew on some level I hadn't gotten it. But somehow I just kind of like shouted in my head, I am not going to go there. I will not go there. And I just forced myself to look at George. I mean, it was almost like turning a crank in my stomach to make my mouth move. I just forced myself to look at George and say, you're absolutely right. And when that happened, it was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Physically, it was so strange. You know when they blow up a building on purpose and it just kind of goes like that? I felt my character armor crumbling to my ankles. It was really a weird sensation physically. And it was, you know, I'd known about, you know, Reich's definition of character armor and his theory about it and everything, and it sounded reasonable, but I experienced it. I experienced my character armor crumbling to my ankles. And after telling George, you're absolutely right, my life changed dramatically. Everything became easier. I just felt like, well, one way I describe it is, before that, it felt like my little mind was in here kind of wheeling and dealing and having too much influence. And after I told George, you're absolutely right, it felt like my little mind was over here tugging on my sleeve. Don't say that, don't admit that, we got to impress these people, you know, we want them to think we're the greatest therapist on earth and blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of like, yeah, thanks for sharing, I understand your fear, and I can be myself and share myself. And the other thing that changed after that was I'd always wanted to teach in other cities and countries and states, and somehow it never happened. Within a year of telling George, you're absolutely right, I was teaching in Toronto and Copenhagen and Frankfurt. And it just kind of unfolded. The other thing that happened to me that was very powerful was after teaching this wisdom for not very long, a year or something, I had this deep feeling inside me that I should be doing this work in prisons. So when I shared that, one of my clients was a volunteer at Monroe Prison and arranged for me to go up and make a presentation. And I made this presentation, and you know, some of the inmates thought I was just full of malarkey. I remember halfway through the presentation, this one inmate got up and started shuffling towards the door saying, "You mean to tell me the warden's my brother? What a bunch of crap that is." But I started doing my intensive in Monroe Prison, which later became a maximum security prison. And I did this work for, over 25 years in prisons, mostly Monroe, but prisons around the state. And it was very empowering because, you know, part of what this wisdom teaches is all negative behavior comes from fear. Underneath that fear, we all love each other and want the best for each other, even if we're not consciously aware of it. And these guys had horrible things happen to them as children, and they grew up and did horrible things to other people. And when I did this kind of spiritually based Gestalt work with these inmates, they ended up with heart connections with the mother that almost killed them, heart connections with the uncle that molested them, heart connections with the father that stuck a rifle in their mouth as a form of discipline and pulled the trigger. The guy said, when that gun went click, my life changed forever. But after he did this spiritually based Gestalt work, he had a heart connection with his father and a peace with his father that he never had before. So if it worked with these people, and I would also have them work on their crimes. And when they worked on their crimes and put themselves deeply in the shoes of the person that they assaulted or raped or murdered, they end up realizing that they assaulted or raped or murdered their brother or sister. And when people create that deep heart connection, whether they're the perpetrator or the survivor, when they make that deep heart connection, there's a kind of a spontaneous forgiveness that emerges that's so powerful. I mean, I can't do those prison seminars without crying. They're so deeply moving. Even the guys that, you know, in the visiting room, you can't sit alongside your wife or girlfriend. You have to sit at a 90-degree angle or a 180-degree angle. Well, in my intensives in the prison, they could sit alongside their girlfriend. And I thought, you know, some guys were just coming. They never participated. They wouldn't do any of the exercises. When we were doing art therapy or something, they just talked to their girlfriend. Some of them wouldn't even sit in the circle. And I thought, well, they just come for the food, because I would bring in food so we could stay together for the whole 7 or 8 hours. I thought, well, they're just here because they can sit alongside their girlfriend and have some decent food. Well, this one guy who had never spoken, and he'd been to, like, I used to do these 4 times a year, 2 or 3 day intensives, and he spoke up one day, and he said, I can't talk about this without crying, but he said, I was about to throw somebody off the tier the other day, and I thought of you people, and I couldn't do it. And I thought, wow, you know, I didn't think this guy was getting anything out of the intensives at all. In the prison, if you want to kill somebody, you throw them off the tier because it's 3 stories to cement. And this guy, even though he was very short, he had biceps like this. I mean, he could have easily thrown somebody off the tier if he wanted to. So it was so validating of this wisdom, the power of it, and there are no exceptions to it. You know, usually when I share this wisdom, people think of Saddam Hussein or Hitler or Stalin. Couldn't possibly be my brother. Everybody's your brother or sister. There are no exceptions. So you know, one of the things that the mini course teaches is that giving is receiving. And that was one that puzzled me at first. And the part about, you know, fear is something our mind is made up and is unreal. I puzzled about that because, you know, if an 800-pound gorilla walked in the room right now, I think I'd be fearful. And is my mind making that up? So some of this stuff I'm still working with, but the basic essence of it has transformed my life and many other people's lives. And it just gave me a tremendous confidence and boost to do all that prison work for 25 years. So I was going there, and the inmates were getting a lot out of it. Their wives and relatives and kids and parents were getting a lot out of it. But I was getting a lot out of it as well. And it really demonstrated that giving is receiving. It was very empowering for me. So there's another metaphor, another way of looking at this wisdom that I find particularly useful. And I call it the two-step, three-step dance. The way your little mind operates is life is a two-step dance. Something happens and you're upset. And that's just the way it is. You could stop 100 people on the street and you could enroll them in how awful it was, and you know, this thing happened and you're really upset and you have a right to be upset about it. Well, as long as you're doing the two-step dance, something happens and you're upset, you give up all your personal power and peace of mind. So I'm going to give you the key to happiness and peace of mind now, and your little mind's going to hate what I'm telling you. Life is really a three-step dance. Something happens, we have an instantaneous interpretation of it, and we're over here upset by our interpretation, but pretending we're upset by what happened at step one. And if you want to feel better, all you have to do is back up to step two, make up an interpretation that gives you a heart connection with step one, the people and events of step one. As soon as you make a heart connection with whatever happened at step one, it transforms the quality of your life. And we all have within us, at any given moment, the power to transform the quality of our life. We all have within us, at any given moment, the power to transform the quality of our life. Now, your little mind hates that, but it's true. And all we have to do is back up to step two, make up an interpretation that gives us a heart connection with step one. It doesn't mean it was okay that that guy's mother was strangling him to death and he was blacking out and might have died if his stepdad hadn't pulled her off. It doesn't condone her behavior. Forgiveness, or this heart connection, doesn't mean it's okay what people do or have done. If somebody lied about you and got the promotion you wanted or something, it doesn't condone that behavior. But if you put yourself deeply enough in that person's shoes that lied about you and got the promotion you wanted, it gives you a peace of mind that will amaze you. And we all have that ability. Another phrase I use when things seem impossible or it's a terrible predicament is, the bigger the disaster, the bigger the benefits. And when I work with people, I'm deeply committed to them getting as many benefits as they possibly can out of the disaster. It's very clear to me the worst things that have happened to me in my life are also the best things that have happened to me. And if those terrible things hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be a therapist. I love being a therapist. I've been doing it 50 years and I love it. I don't know, I tell myself if I get too old to do it or something, I'll have to take up jazz piano or something just to nourish my soul the way my work does. So every terrible mistake, every terrible thing that's happened to me has benefited me tremendously. Now, the little mind hates that kind of information. Or another phrase I use when I'm in a predicament that seems impossible or horrible There's a solution to this that will delight everybody. Now, this is how strong your ego is. I've been in a predicament where it seemed impossible. I forced myself to say the words, there's a solution to this that will delight everybody. It seemed impossible, but I just forced myself to say it. Before I could even finish the sentence, I saw the solution and could feel how disappointed my ego was. Your ego would rather be right than happy. My ego had concluded this is an impossible situation. And when I saw this beautiful solution, my ego was disappointed. The other thing is, the ego is very resourceful. It's not some bad thing you got to get rid of. It's something you need to learn to live with. But I've been in situations where my ego is saying, just kind of screaming, no, no, don't say that, don't admit that, don't admit that. And as soon as I tell the truth about it, my ego says, look at me, aren't I brave? It will take credit for the very thing it was fighting tooth and nail to get me to not say. So, I don't know what else I want to say about this. It's just, it's a way of life. It's a lifelong process. It will give you unbelievable peace of mind. I mean, I worked with a woman in Europe whose father, when she was a teenager, this went on and on and on. He would get her out of bed in the middle of the night, take her in the basement, tie her up and rape her, untie her, go back to bed, and during the day refuse to talk to her. I mean, it was horrible. And she'd tried all kinds of therapy. And I took her through this spiritually based Gestalt process of reliving it as herself, reliving it as her father, inventing a conversation between her and her father. And eventually it reached this point where she could feel how horrible he felt. She could feel how the very sight of her made him angry because it reminded her of what horrible things he was doing, and she was completely innocent, and it just made him feel worse about himself, which made her treat her worse, which made him feel worse about himself, which made her treat her worse. I mean, it's horrible. And when she could get in touch with that and feel the horrible loneliness, I mean, that's the other thing. When people do terrible things to other people, there's a terrible loneliness that goes with it, and this feeling of, if anyone knew this about me, they couldn't possibly love or respect me. And when you put yourself deeply enough in the perpetrator's shoes that you feel that, there's this kind of spontaneous forgiveness that takes place. Doesn't mean that what they did was okay. Doesn't condone it in any way. But the next day she told me she had a peacefulness about her father that she didn't know was possible. It was really beautiful. So this is a very powerful wisdom, can transform the quality of your life. And you can Google George Pransky. He's a wonderful teacher, teaches this wisdom. Sydney Banks, you can Google. You can Google Leonard Shaw and find out more about this. It's a wonderful way to live. And you slip all the time. You just, when you need this wisdom the most, you forget it. But it'll come back to you. And it comes back sooner and sooner and sooner. I mean, after I was reading Jan Paulsky's mini course, some guy cut in front of me on the freeway, and I just, as an experiment, I mean, I didn't think it would make a bit of difference. I just said out loud, I forgive you for cutting in front of me. And it blew my mind. The whole scenario changed. I mean, usually when somebody cuts in front of me, I imagine I'm a tank and I run over them and I leave them like a pop can flattened on the freeway, or I picture the traffic kind of bottling them up so they can't get any place. When I said, I forgive you for cutting in front of me, I thought, gee, maybe the guy's rushing to the hospital, or kids in trouble, or somebody's sick at home. And I hope that the traffic would open up for him. I've never thought that before about someone that cut in front of me. It just kind of shocked me. So when you practice this forgiveness stuff, sometimes it's a little thing like that, and sometimes, like if you had a relationship I had with my stepmother, which was like a nightmare, but at the same time saved my life, it's layers. You think you've forgiven them and you have a heart connection with them, and then 6 months later you forgive them at an even deeper level, or you get an even deeper heart connection with them. And there are 3 particularly powerful attitudes or tools for shifting from your little mind to your big mind. Forgiveness, gratitude, and humility. Just practice forgiveness, gratitude, and humility, and you'll be surprised at the peace that can come to you. And when you get mean or nasty or revengeful, revenge digs 2 graves. Your ego hates that notion, but revenge digs 2 graves. There's no doubt about it. When you find yourself doing, fearful, self-destructive things or being mean to other people, you gotta take a slow, deep breath, forgive yourself, forgive them. It's something you practice your whole life.
Anybody have any questions?
Yes. Can you clarify the character armor a little bit more?
Well, I don't know, because in a way, it was hard for me to believe that our defense mechanisms could actually be in our muscle skeletal system, but that's what Reich concluded, and he's one of Freud's, proteges or something. Reich developed this notion of character armor, that our defenses, our basic defenses, are so deeply embedded in our mind, body, and spirit that they're actually in your muscle skeletal system. And I believed it, but I didn't have any real evidence until I told George, "You're absolutely right." And then to feel this crumbling inside my body to my ankles, it was a very powerful experience for me. And if you want to know more about character armor, I'm no expert on it, but you can Google character armor and find out more about it. One thing that's great about the technology today. But some of our most basic defenses are actually in our muscle skeletal system. And that voice, screaming in my ear about when people get close to me, they need to find things wrong with me. That came up in an instant when George said that. When this thing happens, step 1, George tells me it all came from my ego. Instantly, I'm over here at step 3 feeling hurt and indignant and picked on. And just forcing myself to say, "You're absolutely right," brought me back to step 2 and I gave a different interpretation. And I could see the innocence in George. He was innocent. He wasn't competing with me or trying to find things wrong with me. The other thing is, that I forgot to say, is every time I shared that weekend, it didn't quite feel right. Something was a little off every time I shared. So it all fell into place. Any other questions? Clarifications?
I'm wondering about if you could give an example of the technique. If there was a way to do that in an abstract way, or with a hypothetical example, perhaps?
There are kind of 2 sides to this. One is, part of it is just walking through life, practicing love and forgiveness, practicing reminding yourself. One great practice is just send away for Jampolsky's 18-day mini course and you have a different card every day for 18 days. That's a very powerful tool. If you do that, and I highly recommend it, I need to warn you that on day 8 or 9 or 10, you want to flush it down the toilet. It's so assaulting, it's so threatening to the ego, or you want to give it to somebody that needs it more than you do. You just keep reading it. Read your card every day for 18 days because it has a cumulative effect. If you're asking about the technique, the spiritually based Gestalt technique that I use for deep trauma, you relive the event. I did this with so many guys in prison who had horrible things happen to them as children, and the ones that had courage enough, I would do it with their crime. You relive it with ing verbs like it's happening right now. And there's a little more to it. I don't want to go into every aspect of it. There's a little more kind of a spontaneity exercise I have you do at that point. Then you relive it as the other person with ing verbs like it's happening right now. And then there's a little spontaneity exercise that follows that. And then you have this, you invent this dialogue. You just make it up. Most people can make it up. Sometimes I have to help them a little bit. Sometimes I even have to step in and play one of the roles for them. But you invent this dialogue, making short statements to each other. In the beginning, sometimes it's antagonistic or blameful or judgmental. You know, people like you should have kids, and angry and nasty and blameful. But eventually, you need to get to the point where you make a heart connection with the person. And sometimes I have to coach them a little bit or give them a sentence to say. Leonard says, we'll both be a lot happier if we can work together on this, whatever. But you need that shift to the beginning, the opening the heart a crack to each other. And then you continue this dialogue until you really have a strong heart connection with the person, and this spontaneous forgiveness takes place. With these guys in the prison, when they were being their role-playing their victim, their survivor, and they felt this spontaneous forgiveness, they would usually stop. And I'd say, what's going on? What are you feeling right now? What were your thoughts? And sure enough, what came up naturally was forgiveness. But as themselves, they feel like what they did was so horrible, they don't deserve forgiveness. And I had to encourage them, like, well, go ahead and say it anyway. Just see what it's like to say, I forgive you. And continue the dialogue. So it's a very powerful process. Any other questions or clarifications?
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. I love sharing this. And I feel so grateful to be a therapist for 50 years and still love my work. I mean, I don't see 30 people a week or something. I limit it to, I usually see 15 or 20 people a week. I think if I saw 30 or 40 people like some therapists do, I don't think I'd love it. I play basketball 5 days a week. That's what's wrong with this ugly finger of mine. It's been jammed so many times. And I think that gives me a healthy balance to play basketball 5 days a week with these 20-year-old kids at the community college. I love basketball, so I think I have a fairly balanced life. Once a year I go teach these intensives in Europe for a month, which I love doing. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much for coming. I love sharing this with you. I just hope the best for you and that you find this wisdom can transform the quality of your life.
Love and forgiveness.
And thanks for coming.